Deep within Swan Lake lies a mysterious underwater palace. 7 extraordinarily beautiful maidens are imprisoned there. During the day, they transform into swans and circle above the lake. Only when night falls can they return to the ground. They then return to the palace beneath the lake and regain their human forms. One day, a young maiden secretly escaped from the palace. She transformed into a swan and flew toward the distant horizon. Unexpectedly, her wing was struck by an arrow fired by a prince's servant. The prince entered the forest in search of the wounded swan. Instead, he discovered a young woman lying unconscious on the ground. She was dressed in white and bore a sword wound on her shoulder. The prince brought the maiden back to the royal palace and cared for her devotedly. But after awakening, the girl was unable to speak. No matter how much the prince questioned her, she could not explain where she came from. At that moment, a woman claiming to be the queen of the lake sent an envoy to visit the kingdom. The envoy arrived bearing a vast treasure of priceless pearls. She presented a proposal of marriage to the king. The queen wished to marry the prince herself. Although the queen of the lake was much older than the prince, the king immediately approved the marriage. His reasoning was simple and practical. The prince had already reached marriageable age. Meanwhile, the princesses of the neighboring kingdoms had mysteriously vanished without a trace. There was no suitable bride left for the prince. In addition, the queen of the lake possessed unmatched wealth. Therefore, the marriage was considered highly beneficial for the kingdom. But the prince strongly opposed the arrangement, because during the days he spent with the maiden in white, the two had gradually fallen in love with each other. What the king did not know was that the queen of the lake was hiding a terrible conspiracy. Her ambitions extended far beyond marrying the prince. She was secretly carrying out a cruel plan. On one hand, she sent her followers to kidnap innocent children from all over the land. Because the openings of the giant shells were extremely narrow, only the small slender hands of children could reach inside them. She used the children to gather pearls on her behalf, continuously increasing her vast treasure. On the other hand, she abducted princesses from foreign kingdoms who had been chosen for royal marriages. The maiden rescued by the prince was one of them. She had used magic to seal the princesses' voices, making them unable to speak whenever they left the lake. She also transformed them into swans and imprisoned them within the lake. As a result, the queen became the only noble woman in the world deemed suitable for the prince. Even more frightening was the queen of the lake's cruel and violent nature. Anyone who dared to defy her commands would be mercilessly thrown into waters infested with giant carnivorous fish. She was furious when she learned that one of the princesses had escaped. She immediately sent her servants to secretly infiltrate the royal palace at night, to capture the maiden in white, and bring her back to punish her for escaping. The queen forced her to sort and break apart mountains of accumulated pearls. The sudden disappearance of his beloved left the prince consumed by grief and longing. He picked up a swan feather left behind on the ground, and vowed that no matter what happened, he would find her. Just as the prince had no clue about the truth, and was being forced to accept the arranged marriage, an old man suddenly appeared before him, claiming that he possessed a bottle of magical potion. According to legend, if the potion was dripped onto a token belonging to one's beloved, it would allow them to meet in a dream. Following the old man's instructions, the prince dripped the potion onto the feather and went to sleep. In his dream, he truly saw the maiden in white. Within the dream, the maiden finally revealed her identity. She was Princess Odette from a neighboring kingdom. She told him how she had been abducted, and described the tragic fate of the other princesses who had been transformed into swans and imprisoned in the lake. After learning the truth, the prince was filled with sorrow and rage. He resolved to enter the underwater palace and rescue Odette along with all the imprisoned princesses. Upon arriving at Swan Lake, the prince unexpectedly met a water nymph lady. It turned out that these waters had originally belonged to her, but they had been seized by the queen of the lake. The queen had even used magic to imprison the water nymph lady's husband. The water nymph lady also deeply hated the queen of the lake. After hearing the prince's purpose, she immediately offered to help him. To avoid arousing the queen's suspicion, the prince exchanged identities with his servant. After changing disguises, he successfully entered the queen of the lake's underwater palace. She was even welcomed with great hospitality by the queen. After arriving at the bottom of the lake, the prince quietly learned from the palace cook that Odette was imprisoned in the deepest part of the lake. He also discovered that she was being punished by sorting pearls day and night. The cook told the prince that it was an extremely exhausting task. Constantly sorting pearls would leave one's fingers numb and aching. If she had a sieve, the work would be much easier. After hearing this, the prince secretly took the cook's sieve. He then quietly delivered it to Odette. Meanwhile, the prince noticed that the children were never given enough food to eat. The queen deliberately kept them weak and thin, so their arms could easily fit inside the shells to collect pearls. For that reason, she gave them only tiny amounts of food each day. Seeing this, the prince felt deep sympathy for them. He often secretly brought food to the children, With the help of the water nymph lady and the children, the prince eventually stole the prison keys and rescued Odette. But before they could get far, the queen of the lake had already uncovered his plan. She had sent her servants ahead to block their escape. She even threatened to throw all of them into the lake to be devoured by fish. At that critical moment, the kidnapped children bravely stood up against her. They could no longer endure the queen's cruel rule. With the full support of the children and the water nymph lady, the prince finally escaped with Odette. During the escape, she managed to seize the queen's magic wand and used it to break the curse placed upon all the princesses, restoring their human forms and granting them freedom once again. The water nymph lady also succeeded in rescuing her imprisoned husband. The couple was finally reunited. As for the evil queen of the lake, she could not escape justice for her countless crimes. In the end, she was transformed into a cold stone statue and remained forever beside Swan Lake. At the end of the story, the prince returned to his kingdom with Odette. Both kings were delighted by their marriage. The prince and Odette were finally united in love, and from then on, they lived happily ever after.